Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we cover the infamous, the groundbreaking, leading man.
You're looking for another adjective?
All the adjectives.
It's the death of
Superman. Dun, dun,
That's
dun.
That's it. There's no excitement, only sadness.
And yeah, so this is kind of one of the most seminal talked about deaths in superhero comics. I mean, heck, Superman was basically the first superhero.
Yeah. I mean, it was the basis for every superhero after that to say, where do you gauge your sales? Where do you gauge the power of your superhero? Where do you gauge like the feasibility of longevity in the reading? You base it on Superman.
Right. They literally were writing the rules as they were going along. I mean, he's the foundation.
Yeah.
He's the foundation.
mean, everyone knows him around the whole world.
Yes.
So we're doing this because 30 years ago was the death of Superman. 30 years ago, Dan Jurgens was Superman number 75 was the death of Superman. So we thought, okay, let's do an anniversary podcast on this big event.
Absolutely. And so this epic story was actually supposed to be a wedding issue.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a wedding. And the writers back in the day, they used to have big like jams and just storyboard meetings,
post-its and stuff, just
and things like that.
What would stick?
And they would have a summit every year talking about what are we going to do in Superman this coming year? What are we going to plan out? So everyone could write stories cohesively and in continuity and try to align the way they can. And
and the big point of that too, not to jump in, but the big point of that was everyone thinks that comic books come out monthly and you just kind of roll with it. They actually really do have like a year planned out.
Yes.
Like, this is exactly what's happening with all of these characters. And they're under tight deadlines, but sometimes they're working months ahead of time.
Right. X-Men is known for that too. Of just all the writers getting together, all of that. So, it was a big like storyboard meetings and stuff. And this is around probably, it was in 1988. And so around that time, the Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman was coming out, and everybody was super excited and like, yeah, this is a cool story. We should do the wedding. Oh, they might do a wedding. Hey, we should do one too.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that'd be cool. Kind of sell it out a little bit, but Lois and Clark they're bound to get married sooner or later. They've been dating for 60 years before that. So it's like, okay. We should do that. So they're writing, and all of a sudden editorial is like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. We're going to put that on hold. Oh,
why is that?
So then an infamous line from that storyboard meeting was, Jerry Ordway, one of the big, writer. Well, he wasn't so much a writer. He was he was one of the writers. And
he's a big brain at DC Comics.
He was,
at the time.
at the time, super big in the 90s, stuff like that. But he goes, so let's just kill him. And he kept putting that on storyboards all over time.
Anytime they couldn't figure out what was happening.
Stuck. Yeah. And everybody gets writer's block or if something doesn't stick right away and you're just like, we should just kill him. Well,
now there had been deaths in the comics, of course, before this. I mean, a lot of times everyone thinks nowadays, when someone dies, there's a chance they come back, right?
Yeah.
But that has been happening through the 50s, through the 60s, through the 70s. I mean, it wasn't anything new.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would just reinvent characters, like when Batman Dark Knight Returns came up and they just reinvented Batman into like a dark, brooding character instead of like the Adam West fun character.
Sure.
So they changed superheroes, they changed origin stories, they changed where they died and lived again, but they never did that with Superman.
No, he was pretty much the Boy Scout, the All-American superhero, telling stories about Krypton and the everyday life and trying to humanize him and the human experience and how he was kind of like the biggest superhero and he can do no wrong.
Until this story comes along.
Right. And it was always presenting the creative challenge of writing the best superhero straight laced too. So trying to find those new creative ideas it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Like we talked about this in a previous podcast when we did Superman for All Seasons. I was never a big Superman fan. And so going into this, I knew of Death of Superman. I've watched the shows and some of the animated films that they've come along, and just kind of really doing a great job of explaining what happened here. And so I encourage you guys, you the readers, to search those out too. It's a great way to jump into this.
Right. And by no means was this sort of like, oh yeah, let's just knock this out on a weekend. This omnibus is like 1,400 pages.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. And the story, I don't know, in my mind, there's 3 parts to this story. The first one is the death of Superman. The middle is what happens now that Superman's gone, and are there people mourning, or where is this vacuum of
funeral
power?
For a friend arc, right? Was a big one, and the kind of the aftermath.
And they kind of hint that like the whole galaxy is like, oh, there's no Superman, huh? So like, what does that mean for Earth? And what did Superman represent? What holes did he plug that now is just like, oh, that leaves it wide open, right? So then, and then the third part is, of course, DC figuring, well, do we bring him back?
You're right. The reign of the Superman.
Yes, so that's like the big idea.
Sure. And this took place over like 1992 to 1993. So this was about a 2-year arc. Or just a very story-driven, epic storyline. So it was pretty huge for the time, and there was several writers working on this, including like Roger Stern, Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Louise Simonson, Roger Stern, and a ton more. So many pencilers that happened. It was just really. It takes a team to do this story. And you were there, Ramos. You were kind of tell us about your experience around that period.
So let's see, 1992, 1993. So I was like 11, 12 years old or something like that.
I was an idea.
So I remember hearing about this just, and back then, I mean, when you were kids, there wasn't like this saturation of media as much as it is now. And there really wasn't any like TV coverage leading up to it. I remember the media coverage was crazy about the one issue, just the very last issue where Superman actually died was all in black. It was a black plastic wrapped poly, and it just had like the bloody Superman symbol on it.
And I heard they had bands and stuff.
Yes,
and
they had
knickknacks that came with it.
They really that issue. So, but before that, you only really heard about it through other comic book readers and like comic book shops. Because like, I don't know, even nowadays, the mainstream regular media is not covering what's happening on a day-to-day, issue-by-issue comic book run of Green Lantern. Like you'll never hear that on the TV. Like, hey, Green Lantern number 75 is coming out, everyone. And it's like, you just don't know.
It's mostly if you do something super controversial, or you change a gender,
and even then, nowadays is way more saturated than it was back then. So we were just hearing these like rumblings, like, what, Superman, something's going on with Superman, so I got in line just like everybody else. We stood in line at every comic shop around the whole city, around the whole country. And I did find out it said Superman number 75 when it was released was the actual issue that Superman was killed by Doomsday. It says it sold 6 million copies.
Dang.
Which is crazy. And that sort of started the 90s as this decade of super highs and super lows.
Yeah, because I was going to say the comic industry was not very stable back then.
The 90s, like it was like, okay, your issue hardly sold, and another one sold like millions of copies. And then they were like, yay, we've got tons of money. And then it was like, oh, nothing. And then it was, yay, oh, nothing. And so I think comic book industries, this sort of started, a lot of people will say that it sort of started the shaky ground of not necessarily trying to make money, but just how far, I see it as how far can you push your readers?
Yeah.
How much can you say, hey, everyone, this is where Harry Potter dies. And then like, oh, no, we were just joking. Right. But we got all this millions and millions and millions of dollars because we said it was going to happen. And then now we're like, oh no, that was a dream and it didn't happen.
Sure.
So it kind of like left not like a super sour taste in people's, in people's minds, but it left a like, if you're going to do something drastic, then don't within a year's time make it a moot point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Make it count for something.
Yeah.
Make it substantial, make it mean something.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the actual story of the Death of Superman was really good. I think it's really good. I think it's emotional. I think it's well drawn. It's all the characters are super like represented well.
Yes.
Every page is like at the time was a pretty awesome read because you got a lot of action and you got a lot of like how would people truly react,
right?
So we talked a little bit about it. I mean, so it's Doomsday just sort of appears. It just appears.
Yes.
And so that's the cool thing is you don't get much background. You don't get like this.
You don't get bogged down by that.
After brooding through generations, I've decided I'm taking my vengeance out. He just appears and you're like, who is this big thing? What is this?
And he is basically the exact opposite in every shape of form of Superman. And even Lex Luthor, I mean, they just decided to make him a mindless killing machine.
Yeah. And I do like that they chose for Superman's ultimate demise. That they chose he's almost like a Hulk monster. Yeah. He's just like a monster.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they didn't choose like this, like Brainiac or like Luthor
that's
what
they were
like
saying. Yeah.
Trapping
They didn't
him.
want to do that.
Yeah. They just wanted to, Superman largely as a punch your way out kind of superhero.
Absolutely. So what could challenge him? Yeah. And they still keep bringing Doomsday back every once in a while in some goofy way, but he'll always be the villain that killed Superman.
Didn't they say that there's more Doomsdays out there, or no, it's just one?
I think it's one, but then crazy scientists, things like that.
So this punching monster wrapped up in green.
Yeah, that's how he's first introduced.
It was cool. He's got like a one arm tied behind his back.
Yeah.
And I love in stories where they set like a rule. I think I said this before. Mm-hmm. They set a rule that like you can gauge either power or you can gauge ability or just gauge like what's going to happen later down the road. Like if someone said, well, I guess we won't hypothesize, but like for this one, he is just wrecking everything with one arm.
Yeah.
The other one's tied behind his back. He's tearing down bridges. He's punching cars across the street. He's just tearing down mountains with one arm. So you're like, geez, if he can do that with
I think
one
everybody,
hand,
a lot of readers remember the infamous scene where when he's in the green suit, he's got his arm tied. There's a bird, and he just crushes the bird.
Yeah,
and
the bird like lands on his
maniacal,
hand.
like a laughter. But Doomsday isn't really inherently intelligent. At least he doesn't like have dialogue or anything like that. Maybe like speech, not even just blurbs and stuff. But that's about it.
And he doesn't do anything else other than he just starts making a path of destruction.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Superman's doing his thing, and you see all the other superheroes kind of doing their thing too.
Saving the day like you would any other time.
Yeah.
It's like underworld, like sewer monsters and things like that. And he's trying to like make them feel accepted and help them out, just like one does.
Yeah. And at the time there were a lot of heroes. That's funny, like reading about them now, you're like, well, they were really super big in the 90s and now they kind of aged themselves out. Sure. Like they're not so popular. I mean, the Justice League is very different from where this is the Justice League America, which has Blue Beetle and Guy Gardner and
Booster Gold. Yeah.
Oh, Booster Gold. Yeah.
And Bloodstorm. I think his name is Bloodstorm, something like that. But anyway, so these are all like not even B and C list like heroes. They're like the bottom. Maybe Booster Gold was like their heavy hitter.
Yeah.
And Blue Beetle's cool. Guy Gardner is kind of a loose cannon. Things like that, but not very strong heroes in their own right.
Strong enough that if like a regular human went at them, they'd
Sure.
He'd be toast,
but
right?
then I actually learned this while watching the a couple documentaries today. So you're like, where is Batman and Wonder Woman during this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Batman, he was just going into Nightfall when Bane busts his back.
Yes.
So he was like getting ready for that, and then Wonder Woman was in War of the Gods, and then Green Lantern was in space. So all like main Justice League heroes are gone. Superman's like the one on Earth that's like dealing with everything. So it kind of makes sense, like hearing that in retrospect, going, "Oh, this is kind of like the perfect time if you're gonna do it."
Yeah, and like
having that crux or things like that just to lean on.
Well, and it's cool too because like right at the beginning, Superman's like being interviewed by the media, and they kind of juxtapose him with the like supreme violence that's happening with Doomsday.
Yeah,
and Superman's like, being a superhero, we have to always weigh out, what's the better good, what's the better choice.
yes.
Is violence necessary, or is it just a means to, end something quicker than usual, or do you feel like you're the one that can step in and handle this, or when should you act, kind of thing. So they kind of do set it up of like, you see these other people just getting wrecked by Doomsday.
Yes.
And you're like, Superman, where are you? Right? Like you're reading,
he's talking on TV.
Yeah, like you're reading a Superman comic and you're just like, man, this guy is really, but that's what they were doing on purpose. They were building him up as just like anyone that steps in front of Doomsday is just going to get smashed.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to set that up straight.
Yeah,
and
the gravity of that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like in comics, I guess I want to diverge a little bit. So in comics, when we were kids, we always got a kick out of like gauging the power of one to the next, right? Like who's stronger,
Yeah, absolutely.
Who could take
that.
it? Yeah. And they would always do that. They would just pit them against each other. Like who would win? Batman versus Green Lantern. And people were like, oh, there's no contest, and they would actually they had trading cards. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of you heard about those. They had trading cards where they would show power levels and intelligence and like speed and strength of each superhero. And then you'd be like, okay, look, they're stronger than this, but they're more intelligent. So what does that mean? And you could just sort of geek out on that. But, the big idea is that Superman is supposed to be the top of the heap, like the top. Yep. So if everyone else who seems pretty strong in their own comic, if they just get smacked to the side with just one hit, one punch and you're out, like
they go through like a football field.
Yeah, you should be able to in your brain say, wow, I just saw in a previous comic, I saw them like destroy a building by themselves. Like, you know how strong they are. Mm-hmm. And to have someone just sort of casually smack them to the side, It's like, wow, that's something.
Yeah. Like Blue Beetle takes one hit and is knocked out.
Yeah.
Because he's just an average guy. He's smart.
Yeah.
And he basically gets sent to the hospital right there.
Well, and you start seeing, why a lot of people really like comics. You start seeing this hierarchy of, some people are meant to be in space. Some people can't go in space. Some people, they fight average bank robbers. Right. Some people, could plasma blast, every city block out of the way. You kind of start saying, this guy is strong enough that we need to get the big guns here, like right now.
Yeah, it was a nice touch that the writers decided to prove that point too.
Yes,
and absolutely, and gauge that power level and things like that. Just showing how big of a threat Doomsday was, and just building that slow build. It was a slow build in the beginning. Just everybody gets taken out. Okay, even Booster Gold's like, I'm from the future, but I still didn't see this coming, and I have all this future tech, and he can't do anything.
Well, and I like that he's not killing. They're not killing anybody else.
No,
because they're saving that sort of big moment,
right? Until Superman enters the fray. Dun, 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 dun.
They did a good job of setting up these first issues. There's like 3 or 4 issues before the death of Superman. So they do a good job of kind of like bouncing those around. Yeah. But even right away, they start the very, now I don't want to say like cliche, but like, so the first Doomsday issue is Superman, the Man of Steel. Then it's Justice League America. Then it's regular Superman. Then it's Adventures of Superman. Then it's Action Comics. Then it's Superman, the Man of Steel.
Yeah, because they used all their titles.
Yes. So they just made you sort of follow this big story,
Yep.
but they gave you one issue from each of their titles to sort of do like an old school, like this is a major crossover and we're going to kind of bump it through all of our characters.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. And then as the story keeps developing, the heroes between the Justice League and Superman, they're trying to fight Doomsday while saving everyone at the same time. So you have to, it's very interesting to read like what their decision-making process is like and saying, okay, you go over there. I'm going to try to hold off Doomsday for like a hot minute till Superman gets back.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while. You might get pummeled. I might get pummeled, but we'll meet back here. Nope. But, and I like I guess the main family that gets like saved, or, he's kind of having troubles at home with, his mom being a single parent.
Yeah, they had a lot of side stories.
Yeah, a lot of the side stories.
Like a lot for you to kind of feel like you're not just watching a boxing match. I mean, they had a lot of cool
exactly.
side stories.
I like that story. Yeah, this teenager, he's trying to figure out his place in the world and things like that, and feels like he's not getting enough attention from his mom because she has newborn, and then all of a sudden Doomsday comes in, and just between Doomsday and Superman, they just wreck this house, and like the Justice League is there. They can't really do anything. They're just trying to keep them out of the way, and the teenager guy, he's like, Superman, why are you? And he's like, I'm fighting Doomsday right now, but I have to save you from your burning house. Okay, break. Okay, I'll go save you. Oh God.
Yeah, and eventually Superman kind of bands together with the other Justice League of America.
Just to hold out for a brief moment.
Yes.
So we could do all that.
And they all blast him with like their energy, which separately is pretty significant. I like that Guy Gardner was so messed up that they had to like hold his hand in the direction.
Yeah, he couldn't see.
They're just like, just project your power. And
hold that way.
So they had 5-6 of them blasting Doomsday at the same time.
Right.
Which
full power, give it everything you got.
Yeah. Normally it would be pretty awesome.
Then it's not enough.
Well, and what it does is it releases his other hand.
Oh, right. Yeah. And it kind of shows his almost his true form at that point.
Yeah.
And he just wrecks the Justice League, just wrecks him so hard. And you're like, what? It's a very much, like you said, kind of but in those moments, it's very boxing match and things like that too. So it is very an action heavy fight story in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and it's, so if you talk about like Superman as a character, Superman, I think, had gone so long that he almost just stands there and just lets someone get one hit.
Yep.
He's just like, hey, I'm Superman.
Hey, let's not fight.
Yeah, your violence stops right here.
Yep.
And if you want to hit me, go ahead. I'm not going to be fazed by it, right? So he almost has a little bit of that hubris, a little bit, where it's like, I'm Superman. Like,
absolutely.
Now that I'm on the scene, this issue's over, right?
Right.
Well, Doomsday just wallops him, right? Like he just like gives him one good, because Superman's literally just standing there. So Doomsday just gives him one good smack. And I think Superman said it was like the hardest he's ever been hit or something like that.
Yeah, he's like, man, I've never been hit that hard before.
Yeah, and so you're like, this is for real.
No,
yeah,
that's bad. We're in trouble. But he does his best to just keep fighting through, and he has to push himself farther than he's ever had to fight before.
Yeah. Then I think as the issues go by and as the fighting continues, I think Superman starts realizing that this isn't going to end very well, because he is starting to get tired and he's bleeding and he's bruised, and people are like commenting on that. So like they keep showing, the Daily Planet and everyone else, like, taking photos and videos, and they're like, look at Superman, like he is really worn down.
Yeah.
Like that was not a common thing. Like he usually is okay. He got so what? He got a bloody nose or something. But like he was really, really looking terrible. And Lois was on the scene. He used to duck to side and like talk to her for a little bit.
Yeah, like a little pep talk, like,
Yeah,
hey,
like
this is not going
this
well.
is really a
I love you
chore.
so much.
We'll make sure all of our life insurance is in order because this
yeah.
isn't working very well.
Yeah, because then they were slated to, they were, I think, engaged at the time. Yeah, to engage Clark Kent. Because I don't think, because the world didn't know Superman was Clark Kent at the time or things like that, or they were engaged. I think they knew that Clark Kent and Lois were engaged, but that was about it.
Yes. And eventually, for some reason, Doomsday makes his way to Metropolis.
Yeah,
and that's where
Superman's trying to keep it away, until it just happens.
So that's where Superman's like, this stops here.
Yeah, absolutely, and they just give it their all. But at the same time, they're trying to save everyone at the same time. So it's all this back and forth, and very much a retrospect and kind of, like you said, how far Superman has come. What his city looks like. It was a ideal city to be in, kind of a metropolis. That's the name of the town, but it's like every big city, you kind of see things that look familiar, and this could happen. And what if that happened in real life? Oh my God, how would this happen? Yeah.
Well, and the other part of it too is that Superman is the protector of Metropolis.
Yes.
Batman's got Gotham City. Yep. Green Lantern's got his.
City,
yeah. So all of those other cities have had some pretty terrible things happen to them. Yeah. Or they're just terrible cities to begin with. But Metropolis was always like, we got Superman.
No, so that was the gold standard.
Yeah. So it's like, there's not much that's happening in our city that Superman doesn't already know about.
Right.
And there isn't much damage or anything that Superman just can't fix. Mm-hmm. So it was always like the American dream city,
Absolutely.
Like that's
and
Superman's.
We get kind of reintroduced to like all of Superman's cast of supporting characters and stuff. So it's kind of cool to catch up with all of them. Well, how they react to the situation.
Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy Olsen. On the fly.
He's got his old-fashioned camera.
Yeah. So and then we're at the infamous issue where Superman and Doomsday just hit each other the hardest they can.
Yeah.
And they bit the dust.
So in the omnibus, there's a couple different printings of this. There's maybe 3 now, I think.
4, I think now, because they just reprinted this year. So I think
because of the anniversary.
Yeah.
So I have the one that's not the brand new one, but the last one. They kind of switched some of the pages to glossy. They kind of like up the value or the build on the binding a little bit. Yeah. And then they have the fold out page that's from Superman 75 that was like the big deal at the time, was like, this comic book has a fold out page. Where it's like, oh, that's cool.
So omnibuses and collected editions really don't ever do anything gimmicky like the hollow foil covers or anything like that. They have to go out of their way to fix it.
I mean, they barely print the letters column sometimes, so
right.
They don't go out of the way.
So for them to go and say they're doing that fold out page and they're keeping that because it's so seminal, that's pretty huge.
Yeah. So that's the issue I have, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And it's the all black cover. It's just all black on black with the bloody Superman logo on it.
Sure.
So yes, Superman falls, and that was everywhere. That was all over the media. I mean, people were talking about it at school. I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but for those of you that were there, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was part of pop culture now.
Yeah,
it was that big, seminal moment in comics and pop culture history. So.
I've heard a lot of people say that it was like the assassination of JFK.
Wow!
In comics.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I was like, okay, I don't know, that's a lot, but they're trying to say like in the comic world, that's how big it was.
Sure.
Which again was early '90s. Comics were really riding a high from like the new Batman movie and from just being this new media outlet. It was really cannot be understated, a big deal.
Yeah. And so the story continues, although he has died, and we kind of, like we were talking about earlier, we feel the emotional weight of like Superman dying and just what that means for the world and around him.
And like
who's
Martha,
affected.
Kent.
Yeah, Martha. Yeah, Jonathan Kent. Yeah, his adopted parents. They're just wrecked. Like there's an emotional scene I think during the funeral where they just turn off the TV because they're tired, or they were watching the fight or something like that, where like they just turn off the TV because they couldn't handle watching their son just get pulverized.
Yeah. So DC Comics immediately took that as, all right, Superman's gone now. So in my mind, in my like rough review of it, I think they started off. So I want to break down like where it went off the rails a little bit.
Okay, I do think this. I mean, this is not the best story we've ever read, but so, I think we don't want to express like the emotional weight, the importance of this issue.
Yeah. So DC Comics puts together a great story, kills Superman. That was great. It was a good run. Next step was, what does that mean? And I think they started really good on this. They started really nice to say, these are the characters that are still left. This is the superhero teams that relied on Superman. Now they have to figure out how their jobs have been changed. These are regular people in the world who are mourning the loss of
the
him.
people who've gotten like saved by Superman citizens that are like, I remember when Superman
Supergirl,
saved me.
They had funerals, they had like you were like, all right, I get it, like, wow, this is really what would happen.
What did Lex Luthor think of it, because he went through a whole transformation and things like that.
And I think if they just sort of let it fade away at that point and then just left it with the people that were already in the DC universe, I think it would have been a really strong ending to be like, Superman died, and then here's us mourning and adjusting our lives, right? Done. Story done. But DC just kept going with it. They just kept going. And some people see it as like a money grab, and some people see it as like, you put this story together and you never let us stop. You never let us pause on it. If they just left the Superman title alone,
gave it some space
for like a year, just leave it, just a year.
Oh, wow.
People were like, oh, you haven't mentioned Superman in a year, right? I think that then it would have changed, but they just kept coming out with issues of like new Superman and other people who had the cape, and then other people who wanted to be Superman himself
or be Superman's wife and things like that.
Yes, and it was like they just never let you breathe on it, and they never let you.
I think there were, before we get to the reign of Superman, there was characters introduced that were trying to fill that void of like, in the streets, we're of Metropolis, we're trying to help all these common people. And I was like, that's a lot of spin-off characters, like a lot. And Cadmus was cool because Cadmus already existed, so that was cool. Like the evil scientists that were like, oh, we're not doing anything with Superman's body. Things like that. I thought that was cool, but I think it just it got bogged down by a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, you were going to have people who were saying, if Superman's not here to protect my neighborhood, then I will.
Yeah.
So like that was cool.
Reinforce that. Like,
reinforce like that was all right. That was all right. But I don't think that they should have based it so heavily on Superman. I think they could have used that moment to like build up their own character without everyone putting on the Superman logo. Because what happened was, and this is me going off on just like a tangent, but what happened was Superman's logo was only worn by Kryptonians.
Yes.
Superman wore it. Supergirl wore it. His parents wore, like that was it, right? Then now they just had like regular people wearing it. And it's kind of like dumbed it down. It's kind of like if Batman wasn't there and then all of a sudden regular people were like putting on Batman's costume and being Batman.
And they kind of explored that idea, and it works in some capacities.
So I think at the time it was just like
the appropriate time.
You're like, wow, there's no Superman. Oh wait, there is kind of a Superman. Well, there's no. Oh, who's this guy over here? And then you're like, well, Superman's dead. But look, there's 4 other guys who are alive, and it was just
because they came back with like the cult of Superman.
Yes, it was just really hard for people to just really accept that Superman was gone because the comic issues kept coming.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's my tangent. End of tangent.
And then, we could go on and on about like the reign of Superman and who decided to take up the mantle, and it kind of breaks apart like all of Superman's like personality traits and tries to hold in on those ideas. That was my my perspective from those.
I guess that's a good way to put it. So, so the next phase was Reign of Superman.
Yeah.
And what they did was they had 4 Superman-ish people.
Yeah.
Then some just showed up. One of them looked exactly like Superman. So you thought, is that him? Is he alive?
Right.
And a couple others, you got the idea that one was Superboy.
Yeah. Because as a callback. Yep.
Yeah.
He was like the punk suit.
Yeah. And he had like a leather coat.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, it's like tough little Superboy.
Yep.
And another one was
the Eradicator.
Steel. Yeah. The Eradicator.
Steel. And then Cyborg Superman.
Yes. And Eradicator was the most like Superman.
Yes, he was.
He just gave that vibe.
Yeah. He got a little crazy there for a minute.
Yeah. And Steel was just a regular guy who like welded a Superman outfit.
Yeah, kind of Tony Starked it a bit.
Yeah, and then fought with a giant hammer because his name was
John Steel.
John
something like that.
John Jones or whatever it is.
John, yeah.
So
Steel,
those storylines were like okay, but again, they were I don't know how well they were taken.
I think they were good. I just wish I would have in this collection or whatever. I wish we would have got to that quicker.
Yeah. Well, so
the pacing of that, the pacing from the death to here was a long road.
Yeah, and I'm gonna count up. See, I mean, it's just a lot of issues. So you're like, if you're gonna buy all these as single comics. That was the other problem. It's like,
I suppose, when it was coming out.
Yeah. And people wanted to read the story. There weren't really any collected editions at the time. And so they had a ton of issues. And again, it was Superman of Steel, Superman, Adventures of Superman, Action Comics, Superman Man of Steel, Superman Annual. And they just kept going and going and going. But yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it was like 40, 35 issues. Like, geez. So it was a huge story. And I guess I'm with you when you say that instead of 15 issues, they could have done that in like 6.
Yeah. Yeah. And with modern sensibilities, we can look back and say, you might could have trimmed it up a bit.
Yeah. I mean, if they killed Superman in 5 issues, they sure didn't need 25 issues of like, is he alive or is he dead?
Right.
It was a lot. And that's why people think it was a money grab because they just stretched out the story a lot.
But I will say, once you get to the Reign of Superman and you start investing in these new Supermen, all the 4 counterparts of that, those are they gave the writers the opportunity to flesh those characters out, give them some time to develop their personality traits, what drives them, why are they doing it, why did they want to be like Superman or destroy his reputation, or what were the motives? And that was super interesting. And they finally came out with that animated movie a couple years ago. So good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
And like Superboy was really like, kind of like
the rebel punk.
Yeah, like a little male chauvinist, a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Like
yeah.
He was like looking for a girlfriend kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he was like forever stuck as a 15-year-old Superman or something.
Right. Yeah. Because he's like a clone.
And no one really gave him much. I don't know. They all like even villains were like, you're just a kid kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
They were used to fighting a full-grown Superman.
Sure.
But yeah, he was a clone of Superman, so he was pretty strong. Like he did a lot. He flew and everything else.
Absolutely.
But so you got the story from him of like, if you just showed up and said, "I'm going to be Superman now," how do you build your reputation to be what Superman was? So like that was what they played on, was every single person that came forward and said, "I'll protect Metropolis." They were obviously always in the shadow of Superman.
Yes. Well, they couldn't escape it.
No. They just based that on that.
Yeah. And like I guess it's always good to reinforce that the art in this omnibus is pretty solid through the whole way through.
Yeah, I like Jurgens.
I think he was probably the strongest, him and Ordway. They both, had some major, they were writers and artists, so they kind of had fully fleshed out ideas and stuff, but they kind of let their expertise speak for themselves, for sure. I enjoyed what they did.
They did jump artists a little bit just because from one series to the next. So sometimes you see that in omnibus or collected editions. Yeah, is that obviously what they're doing is jumping from one one issue imprint to the next, and everyone has their own artist in each series.
Right. But it's good, to know that they all worked on it together. So they're not like wildly going from one side to the other.
Yes.
Or just one like storyline, and next they tried to make it cohesive as they could. So that was pretty cool. And eventually, the Man of Steel does return, the original Man of Steel.
They work their way back. They do actually. So I think the middle of the Omni with all of these guys and all the other extras, I was like,
yeah.
But the end, when Superman actually does return, they do a good job of that story. I thought that story was pretty nice, that he came back and that he wasn't just like, I'm Superman again.
Sure.
He kind of came back to say what's changed in the world since I was gone.
A whole lot.
The story was that his body was in a Kryptonian
stasis cocoon,
regenerating.
Oh,
cocoon,
yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like he didn't die. He just like fell into a coma, sleep, and then his little robot friends like stole him, and they had to like have him recuperate in like a spirit world.
Yeah, it was a whole thing. They got weird with it.
That was as weird as they could go, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
But his so Jonathan Kent had a heart attack.
Yeah, I got to that part. Yeah.
And so he sort of saw Clark Kent at sort of the gates making a choice of like, do I want to stay? Do I want to go on to Kryptonian heaven, or do I want to like come back to Earth? And so it was kind of, they touched on the spiritual part of it too, which was really, really kind of nice.
Yeah. You have to be delicate with that.
So, so the takeaway was that yes, Superman could die. If he wanted to die, he could die. But he obviously loves humanity too much, so he came back.
Yes. Save the day.
Yes.
Because we really need him.
Your work is not done. Get back here.
Yes. So, yeah. I guess looking at it as a retrospect, Chris, what would you say, kind of looking at it now, what do you think of the story compared to when you were reading it when it was coming out?
So it's hard to say that, to me, someone jumping into this story nowadays would read it exactly from the point of Superman dies, but he comes back, right? So I always like storylines and movies and books and just pop culture things where you kind of put yourself in like the real circumstances of that story and just say, wow, this person really died, like for real, right? And just sort of absorb yourself into that story. So if I were to tell people to read this, just read it as if you were reading it without any other knowledge. Try not to walk into it with any preconceived notions, and just imagine that you're reading it from the early 90s. Sure. Because that's, I think, the way you should always read stories, of just, read a book like you've never seen the movie. Watch a movie like you don't know what the reviews are. Just put yourself into it and try to just take the story, because it's actually a pretty good story. It's kind of 90s at times.
Yeah.
But it's actually like taking a flagship character and putting every writer and artist you have on it and saying, how can we make an arc, like a huge, momentous arc,
Yeah.
And that's cool.
And for me, like, I seen all the animated movies, and like Superman versus Batman, they actually bring out Doomsday, and they do kind of a abbreviated version of the Death of Superman and things like that. But and they try to bring in like Justice League movie, but that's a whole thing. But so I was spoiled kind of by pulp culture and the media, and trying to bring the story, adapt the story. So coming from that, trying to read this, like the death arc was really good. I love that. I can't wait to get into more of the Reign of Superman, how they really break those characters down. But I didn't quite at first get the emotional impact of the story just right, because it's really fast. It goes really fast until I think the most emotional parts were like you're getting to Lois Lane's perspective and his parents, like Martha and Jonathan's.
Yeah.
I think when I finally got to that, it kind of sunk in, because it's that humanity perspective on the whole situation. So I don't know, I was probably spoiled a little bit by that, but I appreciate what they were trying to do.
Well, and you get the idea that superheroes and supervillains, they know that what they do is life-threatening and they could die at any time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if Spider-Man died or, someone else, it's not necessarily that superhero was defeated. It's like, now what happens with the rest of the world and all the people that they know and all the people and who they're married to and their children and their parents. And so they did a good job in Death of Superman of just sort of touching on everyone that had some sort of connection to Superman. And it was everyone. It was the whole DC universe, everyone. And they kind of touched on that of like, what does that mean now?
Yeah.
And that part was cool. That was kind of cool to read.
Yeah. 30 years. It's been 30 years since this books came out, or the stories come out. And we encourage everyone to read this and experience it in your own way. However you can pick it up, whether it's in the trade, omnibus, watching it, and then reading it, then watching it. However you can experience the story, we definitely encourage you to do that.
Yeah, the trade has the original run of The Death of Superman, but getting all of the other Supermen that showed up afterwards, that might be a little scattered. I don't know what's collecting that. That's why the omnibus came out, to get all of it together.
Yep, the big chunky
omnibus. Yes, the big boy.
Yes. And that's been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Glyer
and Chris Ramos
signing off.
Goodbye.